wanted to ask you, Jeremy, also because we've spoken about journalists, and you spoke with both people in Hamas and the Islamic Jihad about journalists that we have been covering. And of course, Israel's campaign in Gaza, part of the genocidal assault has been the targeting and killing of journalists. Over 200 of them have been killed in Gaza alone. A rate of killing of journalists that is unheard of in generations. One of our contributors in Gaza right now, Rasha Abu Jalal, tells me that Israel has targeted journalists to such a degree that regular people in Gaza are afraid to live close to journalists in the same building or in the same tent or in a tent nearby, that they ask journalists to move because they're afraid of being bombed next to them. That's what it's come to. And our colleague, Hossam Shabat, a 24-year-old journalist who was a reporter also for Al Jazeera Mubashir and a contributor to Dropside News, who was assassinated on March 24th. Hossam, as many people know, was one of the few reporters who remained in the north for the entirety of the genocide. And in October, he was labeled a terrorist and a militant, along with 5 other journalists for Al Jazeera Mubashir, by the Israeli military. They said that they either belonged to the Qassam Brigades or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that they were militants essentially. And then on March 24th, the Israeli military, and so they put these 6 journalists on a hit list. And on March 24th, they bombed Hossam in Beit Lahia. They blew his legs off his body, and they killed him. And they repeated after this that he was a militant, that he was a member of the Qassam Brigades. And they wrote, quote, "Don't let the press vest fool you." So Jeremy, you asked Osama Hamdan about Hossam Shabat. Tell us what he told you. And also, I'll briefly say about Ali Sammoodi, who's a journalist based in Jenin in the West Bank, a veteran journalist of many decades in Jenin, who was called the living martyr because he had been shelled, he had been shot, he had been detained, but he managed to continue reporting from Jenin. He was next to Shirin Abu Akleh when Israeli snipers opened fire on them. He was shot himself in the shoulder and very badly wounded. Last week, and I'll say I interviewed him in Jenin, in his house. He's the most kind, generous journalist I have met. His granddaughter was playing with him. He called her his best friend. And then the next day, the Israelis raided Jenin. He was out there in the street reporting live. Really a veteran and an incredible journalist. Last week, the Israeli military raided his home, beat him up so badly that he was hospitalized, and threw him into detention. There's reporting in Haaretz that, as opposed to many other journalists, including Mujahid al-Saadi, who reported for us from Jenin in September, who's been in prison since September in administrative detention, where you can be held without charge or trial. Ali Sammoodi is being put on trial in a hearing today on charges reportedly of having a connection to Palestinian Islamic Jihad and to funding terrorism. That's in quotes. So you also spoke about him with Muhammad al-Hindi of Islamic Jihad. So can you just talk about both those cases and what you were told?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Sharif. First of all, when the Israeli government put out the hit list on our journalistic colleagues, these 6 reporters that you're referencing, including Hossam Shabat, and also someone that I consider a journalistic hero, Anas al-Sharif, who is, every time I watch him, I feel such a sense of shame that Western journalism has failed to defend, support, promote the work of our Palestinian colleagues, not to mention to stand ferociously against the targeted assassination campaign and mass murder campaign that's been unleashed against these brave journalists and oftentimes their family members as well. But when that happened, I started asking, because the Israelis also released a document that they claimed showed ID numbers and which units they were in. And they said that, if I recall correctly, that Hossam Shabat was a sniper in the Beit Hanun battalion of the Qassam Brigades. So I was asking Hamas about this, and nobody was really ever, responding. I was saying, can you see if there's any truth to this whatsoever? So I've been working on this for months and months, and I every once in a while would ask about it. Not because I believed there was any truth to it. I never thought there was any truth to it, but because I felt like it was the responsible thing to do journalistically. And I also was wondering, were these documents fabricated? So I've been poking around this for a while, before Hossam was killed even. And, since he was killed, I then re-upped that, and I started going back to various Hamas officials, and saying, can you give me comment on this? And it just wasn't happening. And so finally, when I then met with these Hamas officials, I didn't just meet with 2 Hamas officials, I met with a whole series of Hamas officials. They actually told me Qassam Brigades did an audit of this question, which is surreal to imagine, and investigated it and spoke to people, not just in Beit Hanun, but in other areas. And we can say, this is what Hamas said, we can say with not a single shred of doubt that Hossam Shabat was not a member of Hamas, and was most certainly not a member of the Qassam Brigades, and was most certainly not a sniper in the Beit Hanun battalion. And then I said, well, what about the documents that Israel put up? And Osama Hamdan said, totally fabricated documents. I said, so you're saying clearly on the record to me that those are fabricated documents that Israel released? He said, absolutely fake documents. On the issue of, but none of that shocked me. And it feels even dirty to ask those questions. But you know what? That's the reality we live in right now. You know that they're lying. The Palestinians are constantly being forced to prove negatives to the world. That's the reality of what it means to be not a Palestinian journalist, to be a Palestinian. You have to somehow spend every day proving your humanity, that you're a living human being to the world. And so in the case of Hossam Shabat, Sharif, you spoke with him, I talked to him. Hossam was a brave, but also gentle, poetic, remarkable person. He wanted to be a writer. When we would get his writings in Arabic, it was, you would share it and say, he wrote lyrically. I remember the emotion that you expressed when he was assassinated, but that's the story of Palestinians, that they're constantly having to prove negatives, prove things that they're accused of that are, false. And so I did ask those questions because I wanted to get on the record from the entity that he was accused of being a member of. And had he been a Qassam member, Qassam probably would have put out a martyr bio for him. So that's the story on the Hossam allegations that Hamas now says are totally false and based on fabricated documents. Regarding Ali Sammoodi, I happened to be with Mohammed al-Hindi, who is the number 2 leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the second biggest armed resistance faction fighting in Gaza right now. And so we were sitting together when another person said, they've taken Ali Sammoodi. And Mohammed al-Hindi said, the journalist? And he said, yeah. And then you texted me, Sharif, and you said, they're accusing him of being involved with some financial business involving Islamic Jihad. Well, I'm sitting there with the second highest ranking member of Islamic Jihad. And I'll just tell you this at a human level. When I said that, he thought maybe that it was being mistranslated. He said, Ali Sammoodi? He's like, of course I know who he is. He's a famous Palestinian journalist. He said, he has nothing to do with Islamic Jihad. Why would we ever use someone like him for anything? And he was reacting just sort of like, he thought I was maybe wrong, So then I said, no, this is serious. My colleague just, told me. I then read it. Someone translated it verbatim to him. And I said, can you respond to this? And he said, this is a total lie. And these are the lies that Israel uses to undermine Palestinian journalists and Palestinian people all the time. So, he said Islamic Jihad wouldn't need to use anyone like that. We haven't used him. He has no relationship to Islamic Jihad, except the relationship you, Jeremy, have to Islamic Jihad, which is that you interview people from Islamic Jihad.